Hello there everyone, Data Pioneer here with the Linux Unix Tech Channel, and I'm out on my Farron OS Linux system. Hope everybody's doing great out there today. So let's take a look at what we got planned for today. What I thought I would do is take a look at Secure Shell, or SSH, which is a means of communicating between a client and a remote server for a Linux admin or just a regular Linux user. It's a great way to secure your connection, and so I thought we'd take a look at that today. And so let's take a look at that right after this. Okay, so let's get started here. I'm out on the SSH or Secure Shell homepage, and it's at ssh.com/SSH. I'll put a link to this down below the video so that you have it if you want to visit and take a look at this. There's quite a bit of information up here. It talks to you about who the creator of SSH is, a little bit about the SSH protocol itself. If you click on this link here, you can see that it is a protocol for connecting a client with a server and communicating back and forth. The way the mechanism really works is you've got a client, which is, in my case here, is going to be the local Farron OS desktop. And then I've got a remote server, which is a VM of Ubuntu 20.04 LTS that will be serving as that remote server. And so we're going to connect from the client to the server using SSH. And it is a means of communicating back and forth in a secure, cryptographically safe manner, so that if you've got people out on the network or outside, in my case on the LAN, there wouldn't be anybody outside necessarily unless they got into my LAN. But anyway, if they're sniffing packets, they're not going to be able to see traffic going back and forth. They're not going to be able to peruse keys and things of that sort. So it's a great way of doing it. There is a way of doing it typically or normally, and then there's a way of doing it so that you don't have to supply a password. We are going to look at password authentication, and then we're also going to look at secure keys and eliminating the need for the password. All right, so you can take a look at the rest of this page. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there's quite a bit of information up here. And then off to the right-hand side here, there's some information about the SSH Academy that you might want to take a look at. So let me get out on the terminal, and I have bumped up the resolution here, or the font size rather, and hopefully you can see that on the screen. I don't want to bump it up too high, but I think you can see it. So let's take a look at what SSH is in terms of Linux, and so let's do a man page on SSH. It's one of the quickest ways of doing it. Man pages are very good because you can get a lot of information from man pages. Sometimes you can get more information than you really want, and then usually that's the case here for things like SSH, because not only does it tell you what it is, and it is the Open SSH client, by the way. So when I say SSH, I am referring to the Open SSH client, and it is a Berkeley Software Distribution General Command Manual that's showing us this information, and that's based in Unix. And so here it tells you all about SSH, the description of what it is. It says it's a program for logging into a remote machine and for executing commands on a remote machine. And there's a ton of information here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and quit that. And instead of looking at that, let's look at something called tldr, which is something I've started using. I'm sorry. Let me do the clear the screen here. tldr SSH, and here we have information about Secure Shell. Now, what this is, TLDR is too long, didn't read. It's basically a compressed or smaller version of the information that you get from the man pages, and it's not as much information, doesn't overwhelm you. And so it says that the Secure Shell is a protocol used to securely log onto remote systems, can be used for logging or executing commands on a remote server. That's what we're going to be doing today. And so here's the command syntax that you use: SSH username @remote host. The username is required only if the remote server or remote machine that you're logging into has a different username than you have on your system. Now on my Farron OS system I have Data Pioneer as the username, and on my remote server I have Data Pioneer as well, so I will not need to use username when I log in. That's only if you have a different username that you need to use that. If you're connecting to SSH using a private key and you need to point to a specific key, you will need to use this command. We will be doing that in this demonstration. Okay, so let me go back to a clean terminal window here. So let's get back on the Farron OS system, and I'm in the Farron OS main PC terminal here. So I'm on my local machine, or the client it's referred to in the SSH world, and I'm going to remote into a remote server. Now I have a remote server out here that I created in VirtualBox, and it's an Ubuntu 2004 LTS server. I've already logged into it, but I'm going to go ahead and log out of it and log back into it. So you can see this is Ubuntu Server 1. And so I'm going to log into it with the username of Data Pioneer, and I'll put in my password. Okay, and so I'm logged into it now. And so let me clear the screen. We're going to need to get the IP address of the server, and to do that you can just simply type in IP space A, and here you can see that the IP address under number 2 there for ENP0S3 is 192.168.1.70/24. Alright, so the ENP0S3, if you wondered what that is, for veterans we used to see ETH0 or ETH0. But ENP0S3 is Ethernet port 0 socket 3. So if you're interested in what that was, that's what that is, and that's the connection that we have to the LAN here on this remote server. So let me go ahead and clear the screen. So the IP address again is 192.168.170/24. So it's a Class C IP address. So let me clear the screen. Whoops. And if I can type today. There we go. Alright, so let's go back to the clean terminal window that we have, and let's SSH into that remote server. And so the command that I will use is an SSH command. So I type SSH and a space, and remember now that if you have a different username on the remote system, you will need to include that. And since I don't need to include it here because they match the Data Pioneer account that I have right here. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and just simply put in the IP address, 192.168.1.70. Alright, the first time that I try to log into that remote server, it's going to come up with this warning message that says the authenticity of host 192.168.1.70 can't be established. There's an ECDSA key fingerprint, which is the SHA256 hash on that fingerprint. And then it asks me, are you sure you want to continue connecting? Well, yeah, or I wouldn't have SSH'd into it to begin with. So I'm going to say yes, but you need to do that. Don't say no. Hit enter, and then it says that it permanently added 192.168.1.70 to a list of known hosts. And it's asking me for that password on the remote server. Let me go ahead and put that in. And I'm in. Okay, so I'm actually in to the remote server, because you can see here it's pointing me to Data Pioneer at Ubuntu Server 1 that you saw earlier. Alright, so now what did that do? Let me get back out of this. So what did that do on the local system when I remoted in the first time using SSH? Now there is a file called known host, and remember it said that it added it to the known host file, that ECDSA hash. And so let's get into that, and the way to get into that is to cd into the // which is a shortcut for the home directory, home Data Pioneer. There's a hidden directory called SSH, so it's a .ssh, so I hit enter. And if I do a listing on that directory, you can see that I have a known host file here. Alright, so if I do a cat on that known host file, you can see that here's the hash that was presented and placed in that known host. Now, so that means that in the future, from my Farron OS machine, if I remote back into that server again, it's not going to prompt me with that warning message, and I'll prove that. And so let me go ahead and clear the screen. And so let's do an let's go back to the, don't need to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and get a clean screen here back to the home directory. And so I'm going to SSH back into 192.168.1.70 one more time. And you can see now I'm not getting the warning message, it's getting prompted. So what it did was it read the known host. It saw that 192.168.170 was already known to SSH, and so it's now prompting me for the password. So if I put that in, it lets me in. Okay, so I'm back into the system, no problem. So let's go ahead and clear the screen. Okay, so you can see that we have successfully SSH'd into our remote server from the client, which is Data Pioneer at Farron OS main PC, using a password, and that's all well and good. You can do that, no problem. But the only problem, though, that it does present occasionally is, especially if your password is not very strong, there is the possibility that someone could eventually determine what that password is and could then use that to get onto your server. And in this case, it's just a VM that I created. But if that were a dedicated server that has a lot of information on it, that's critical to your operation, or your serving as a server with a lot of files that are important to you, that could be a problem. Someone could get on your system and use it. So let's replace that password with something called a secure key, and I'm going to show you now how to create a key here in SSH, or actually create what's referred to as a SSH key pair. And so to do that, we're going to use another SSH command, and that is SSH and tac keygen. So SSH-keygen, and then we're going to tell it what type of key do we want to generate. So we're going to put a -T for type, and then what kind of key do we want? We're going to use, in this case, an RSA key. All right, and then what's the strength that we want to use? We're going to use a bit strength of 4096, which is a very strong key. And then we're going to go ahead and hit the enter key, and it says generating the public-private RSA key pair, an enter file in which you want to save the key. So by default, it wants to save it in home data pioneer.ssh, which is that hidden directory that I told you about and showed you. And it creates what's called an ID_RSA key pair. All right, I'm going to go ahead and select the default, hit enter key here. And then it's asking me, do you want to enter a passphrase? Empty for no passphrase. All right. Let me talk about passphrases for a moment. You can go ahead and hit enter here and bypass this, and no passphrase will be generated or required. No passphrase will be stored in the key. Not a good idea if you're going to be using this key to go outside the internet. All right. So if you're going to connect to a remote server outside of your WAN, somewhere else in the world, you would not want to bypass this passphrase requirement here. Now, in my case, I'm connecting to a remote server which is on my local area network, or LAN, that I created using VirtualBox. So it wouldn't be a big deal. So if I hit enter here and just bypass the passphrase requirement, that's no biggie. The only way that a person could access that would be then to get on my LAN itself, bypass my firewall, etc. And that's not likely to happen, but it's not a big deal. However, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're connecting to a remote server somewhere else in the world, and so I'm going to use a passphrase here. So let me go ahead and put one in, and I'm going to use a very strong passphrase. All right, it's asked me to enter that same passphrase again. And it was successful. They matched, and so I know what it is. And so you get this, your public key has been saved in this location. The key fingerprint is, and here's the SHA-256 hash for that key. One of the things I didn't do is I could have put a comment on the end of that, but I didn't. So that's okay. But you can use a --C switch and then put double quotes and just put like Data Pioneer default key in that. And so that would be identified on the key itself. I didn't do that, so just keep that in mind. But what happens is it generates a nice random art image for you here of your key. And so what did that do? What that did was, if we're still on the Farron OS system here, and so if I do a cd into the directory that is hidden and do an ls.lh, you can see that we have two new keys here, an ID_RSA key and an ID_RSA.pub key. Now this is the public key and hence the .pub extension. All right. This key here is one that you want to give to the world, okay? And you might even want to put it up on a server. We're going to upload that key to our server so that it has it, so that we can remote in without a password requirement, so that we use our key instead. But this is the key here, ID_RSA, that you do not want to share with anybody. That's a key that you want to keep private. All right, it's called the private key. And the reason for that is that's the key to everything. If someone gets their hands on the ID_RSA key, then they can get into your systems that you remote into using that key. Now, how is it protected? Well, if you look at the ID_RSA.pub key, you'll notice that the permissions on that key are as shown here, which is read-write for the owner user, read for the group owner, and read for the world. Okay, so that way the world can see that public key, that when you give it to them, they'll be able to read it. In a notation, or numerical notation, that would be 7. Well, that would be 4, 5, 6. 4, 5, 6. So that would be 6, 4, 4. So the read has 4 and 4. So that's 6, 4, 4. All right. So that would be the numerical permissions for that particular key. So 644 would be okay there. All right, but for the private key, there's a little more security needs to be involved here, and so you have read-write for the owner and then no permissions for the group owner or the world. So the world can't even read the key, neither can the group owner, and so this is a 600. So you want to make sure that the permissions are correct here. So this is 600 for the private key and 644 for the public key. All right. All right. So let's clear the screen here, and let's take a look at that public key. So let's do a cat on the ID_RSA.pub, and so here's the appearance here of the actual key itself. This is SSH RSA. And it goes all the way down to here, which it says the Data Pioneer at Farron OS main PC. If you don't put a comment on that key, that's the only way you're going to really know what key it belongs to, which is right there. All right. But the key itself is this first part, identifying the key, all the way to the very end. And so if you wanted to copy that key out someplace to store it, you could. And if you want to copy that to the server, you could do that as well. But we're not going to do it that way, and I'll show you how we're going to do that here in a moment. So let's clear the screen, and now one of the things I'm going to show you, which you should never do, but I'm going to do it here in this demonstration because I'm going to destroy this VM as soon as I'm done with the video. And let's take a look at the private key. So I'm going to do a cat on the ID_RSA, and here is the actual key itself for the RSA private key. And so it's a lot more involved. Okay, it begins here and comes all the way down to the very end here. All right, so that's the total key itself right there. That's the key that you want to preserve, keep private, not let anyone else read it. So let's go ahead and clear the screen. Okay, so as I mentioned, what we'll need to do is we'll need to copy that key, the public key rather, up to the remote server so that we can SSH into that remote server without the requirement for a password. All right. And the way to do that, there is a command that will let you do that. You could just copy the key, get on the server, another means, walk to the server if you could do that, and you could just copy that key into the proper place, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to use an SSH command to do that. And so let me change back to the home directory. get a clean screen here. And so the key that or the command rather, that we're going to use to copy that key up is SSH-copy-ID. And then we're going to tell it what key to copy up. And to do that, we're going to use the -I switch or option. And so that is an input file. And the key is the home directory.ssh. And it is ID RSA pub. Okay, so it's the public key rather. And so the IP address of the server is where we're going to send it. And since the username is the same, we don't need to put that in. And so we're just going to put in 192.168.1.70. I'm going to hit enter, and it's telling us that it's prompting us rather for the password for Data Pioneer at 192.168.1.70. We're going to put that in. All right. It says number of keys added 1. Now try logging in to the machine with SSH 192.168.1.70 and check to make sure that only the key or keys you want were added. So let's go ahead and do that. SSH 192.168.1.70. Enter. And it's asking me now for what's the passphrase for the key. Remember, we put a passphrase into that key, ID_RSA.pub and .rsa, or _RSA, so for the key pair. So let me go ahead and put in that passphrase, and it's important that you remember that. Now the passphrase here is what makes this a very, very, very secure key, because even if somebody can get their hands on the key, if they don't know the passphrase, then the key is worthless to them. All right, so let me go ahead and put that in. Let me retype it again, make sure I got it right. All right, and so I did enter it correctly, and it did drop me into the server. So I'm on the server, as you can see down here, Data Pioneer Ubuntu Server 1. All right. All right, so what did that do here? So let me clear the screen, and let's take a look at the location for where keys are stored here on the server. So let's change directory to the home directory, to the same hidden SSH directory on that server, and let's do a listing of that. And you'll notice that there is a file here called authorized keys. It's a file. That file did not exist before we remoted in with the key, after we copied the key up. All right, I didn't show you that, but just take my word for it. That file did not exist. That file gets created on the fly by SSH once a key is up on the server and you attempt to log in and you enter the passphrase and you actually connect. This file is created, all right, and it has permissions of 600 on the key, which means that the user, Data Pioneer on this server, can read and write to that file, but the group owner and the world have no access to that key at all. Okay, which is what you want, because you don't want anybody looking at that key right there, or a key file, authorized keys file. All right, and so let's go ahead and do a cat of that and take a look at it. And so here, what was put up there is this Data Pioneer _ main PC key. This is the public key that we looked at earlier. All right, so we used the SSH copy ID, told it what key to put up, which is the ID_RSA.pub key, and so here it is. It copied that key up there. Now, because it's copied that key, and because it's now residing in this authorized keys file under the hidden directory SSH under the home directory of the user Data Pioneer on the server, okay, there's no need anymore to have a password. I can log into this server now using my passphrase. So let me get out of this, exit out of that, get back to the main PC. Let me clear the screen. All right. And so let me go ahead one more time and let me SSH into that server. So let's SSH to 192.168.1.70. And notice though it's asking me that for that passphrase again. All right. Remember I told you earlier that if you don't enter a passphrase here, you're not going to get prompted. But I deliberately wanted to because I wanted to make it more secure. Because in the scenario here, I assumed I was going to SSH into a server outside of my public local area network, or my private local area network. So let's go ahead and enter that passphrase one more time. And boom, I'm in. All right, so let's go ahead and log out. And the server, clear the screen. Okay, so what can we do to eliminate the need to enter that passphrase every time we remote into the server? Because we were using a password, and now we replaced that password with a passphrase, and so administratively we still have the need to enter a passphrase every time, and you may not want to do that every time you remote into that remote server. So with SSH, so let's look at a way of doing that. The way of doing that is using something called the SSH agent. And what the SSH agent is going to do is it's going to, once we load that into memory, that agent's going to sit there, and until you drop the terminal session that you're in, it will sit there in memory. And when you go to SSH into the terminal using the typical way that you do it, which is SSH space and then the IP address of that server like we did before, rather than being prompted for the passphrase, the SSH agent is going to hand off that passphrase to the remote server in the handshake, and you won't be prompted for it, and then it will connect you automatically. All right, so let's take a look at what that SSH agent is. So if I run an eval command and put the SSH agent inside the argument for that particular command, eval $SSH agent here, and hit enter, it tells us that an agent PID of 22114 has been generated. All right, let's take a look at that. So if I run a PS AUX against that and grep for 22114, you can see that 22114 is a process that is running on the terminal, and it is that SSH agent. All right, so that SSH agent is running right now in the terminal. All right, and so what can we do to get that copied up to the memory so that we don't have to copy it up there every time, or we get it copied up there any other way? So let's clear the screen. And so what I can do is I can actually combine this command into two parts, and so I can run eval $ and then come back and put in the SSH agent here as the argument, and then I can do an and which is the and boolean here for this command, for the compound command, and then do another command which is called SSH add. What SSH add is going to do is it's going to add the agent up to memory. All right, so again you have the eval and then the $, and inside of that the SSH agent, and then the and then the command to actually copy that file, or copy that passphrase or the agent up to memory. All right, and so here with the at symbol, it's not going to run this part of the command unless this part of the command is successful, and that's what the or the and does. So let's hit enter, and so it tells us that the PID is 22399. It's a different PID, but that's okay. Now it's running in the background, and so it's asking for that passphrase before it copies it up to memory. And so here the passphrase again, I'll put that in. All right, and it says that the identity was added, and that it added that identity as Data Pioneer default. All right, so what that does is now the SSH agent is running and it's active, and it is waiting for me to SSH back into the server. And when it connects to that server, rather than me being prompted for a passphrase, it should just drop me in to the system. So let's take a look and see if that happens. Let's do an SSH 192.168.1.70. and hit enter, and boom, I'm in. All right, so the SSH agent was sitting in memory with the passphrase loaded, and when the handshake came for that passphrase, rather than prompting me for it, it just passed it off to the SSH server on the other end and made the connection for me. All right, and so that's how it works. And so let's go ahead and exit the server here and clear the screen. And now, as long as I don't close this terminal session, I should be able to SSH into 192.168.1.70, and boom, I'm in every time. All right. So what happens if I accidentally get out of the session altogether? There is a way you can do that, and the way to do that is, let's exit here. And so let me just go ahead and exit out of that altogether. And now let me bring up another terminal, another window. All right, so now I'm back on the main PC. Let me bump up the font size one more time here for you. And so if I try to run the SSH against 192.168.1.70 again, you're going to see that that's not going to work. Well, that's not going to work that way because I put in the wrong IP address. SSH 192.168.1.70. You can see that it's asking me once again for that passphrase. All right. So that means when I get out of the session, the SSH agent is no longer loaded in memory, and so I lose it. All right. And so I will need to enter that passphrase again. And I'm in. All right, so let me go ahead and exit here. Now, how do I get that back? All right, to get it back, I will need to do the eval and just rewrite. In other words, just redo that whole command again. And ampersand SSH add. All right, asking me for the passphrase again. And it's added that identity back. And now if I do an SSH back into 192.168.1.70, boom, I'm back in again. So if you do get out of the session, you just run the command again, and you're back in, no problem. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful for you, and I've enjoyed bringing it to you and showing you some things about SSH. And this video, we showed you how to use the SSH protocol to securely connect a client, which is your local machine, to a remote server, in my case a VM that I created of Ubuntu 2004 LTS server. And I showed you how to do that with a password, and then how to replace that password with a secure passphrase connected to an RSA key that we created, or a key pair. And we uploaded the public key to the server, and then we used an SSH agent to get in the middle, to jump in the middle for us, using an eval command, and that allowed us to then not be required to be prompted for that passphrase every time we connect, as long as we don't drop this terminal session. Hope this was helpful. I'll put the link down below the video to this particular website and to all of the commands that I used in this video. If you enjoyed this video, you thought it was helpful, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do that. Subscribe to my channel as well, Linux Unix channel. And this has been Data Pioneer. Hope you have a nice day. Take care. Bye-bye.